All right, this is my response to the reflections that you guys gave me in class today. This is for fifth period, course two, pre-calculus class. Um, I thought it was a good activity. I really liked hearing what you guys had to say. I kind of decided what I wanted to do was go through some of the things specifically, and also um, do it in a way that, well, I guess I've realized that things that make me nervous and uncomfortable kind of prevent me from talking about things in an engaging way oftentimes. And the thing that used to be, maybe it still is, was kind of going on long and long in sort of a one-way form of communication. So number one, I'm going to practice doing that because this may go on for about 20 minutes. And then I also am planning to share at least one of the three of these that I make today, with a larger audience of teachers who are committed to using Desmos and becoming more effective as teachers through this school year. And the thing that makes me nervous about that is just that opens up teachers in schools where the needs are much different and honestly greater than they are in our school. And so talking to you about the issues you are experiencing while recognizing that one of the things communities that have advantages often do is speak in a way that comes off as entitled, and it disregards the experiences of people who have it worse. But I figure the only way I'll get better at things that make me uncomfortable is by hitting them head on. So one of the things I think that's difficult for teachers, no matter where they teach this year, is that we're missing this opportunity. Like, I think a lot of us love our subject matter. That's true. But really, what brought us into this profession is that we like the interaction with our students. We like talking about stuff that's meaningful to us, but in a way that helps you understand the world better. We like those moments where we go off on random tangents and end up spitting on the kids that are in the front row because we're so worked up over it. So, two things that I found, that I've read about, that I've found interesting, that I may come back to in this whole rant that I'm about to go on is number one, this idea of scale invariance, which I think is something that's just going to be cool, and you'll see in the future of math a lot. And the idea of scale invariance is that a lot of things exhibit the same properties regardless of what scale you look at them at, and that's what this whole idea of fractals are. That you zoom in and out and you keep getting the same picture over and over again, and that's as opposed to something that's normally distributed. When something's normally distributed, the assumption is everything is pulled towards the center. And actually, I think there's evidence that we overuse the normal distribution because there's this hedge fund, very wealthy investor, Nassim Taleb, who's really become rich by being a contrarian and investing on a strategy that recognizes that we underestimate the likelihood of black swan events and exploiting the fact that we think everything is drawn to the middle or normally distributed when really there's a lot of applications of scale invariance. And I think where scale invariance becomes interesting to me is when you think about systems and communication, and the same things that happen to prevent communication in systems happen inside yourself too. They happen on the big and they happen on the small scale. And a lot of times we use the bigger picture to escape from doing the small type things. And a lot of times we don't even know where to start when we start talking about the small type things as far as like communication patterns go. Another thing that interests me is this book that I've recently read called The Math Gene. And the book is about abstract thinking and about mathematics, but it's also, a lot of it is about language and linguistics. And the author talks a lot about this thing called offline thinking. What he calls offline thinking, I think, is what we try to mean when we say abstract thinking. Like the idea that if you put a piece of cheese in front of a rat, the rat is thinking about that cheese, and the rat can almost taste that cheese. That's a little bit of an abstraction because the cheese isn't in the rat's mouth. But when you take that cheese away, the rat and some other animals, mammals especially, can still picture that cheese if it's been put in front of them, and that's a little bit more abstract. But humans have this ability to think abstractly that's different than all other animals out there because we can picture the cheese before the cheese has ever been there. And so a lot of math comes down to abstract thinking and thinking about symbols that represent other different objects and viewing patterns and logic and all that kind of stuff. And the argument that he makes, which is compelling, is that it's the same type of thinking that we use to develop language. It's like this offline thinking is an ability that we've developed because it's allowed us to be better communicators, because it's allowed us to think about, like, when you go back 3 million years ago, it was advantageous for a group of I guess they weren't Homo sapiens, but humans to sort of split up and hunt together while they were thinking about what the other person was thinking about. So sort of thinking about group strategy. And his argument is that all math is sort of like an evolution of that kind of abstract reasoning, which we all have. And it's all the thing that gives us the ability to learn language at such a young age. And then the part that people stumble on is oftentimes the emotional part, which is, again, interesting to me because I think we overlook the emotional aspects of learning oftentimes, and that does a detriment. But the emotional part is very real. And in math specifically, that's that, like, how do you respond when something confuses you and it gets into your head that you can't learn it, and it makes you feel bad about yourself, or it makes you get frustrated, right? That's an experience that we all have with math and with things that are um, very technical, I think, sometimes. And at least if nothing else this year, you can be practicing how you respond to that feeling. And I think that that'll serve you well no matter what area you explore, whatever topic you're interested in, whatever future your life holds for you. Is like learning how you respond to setbacks is something that this year will teach you about. Um, so as far as the survey that I gave, I thought it was cool that I played music while you guys were doing this. I feel like there's some things I wouldn't put music on for myself because it doesn't help me focus. But for something like this, where I'm being reflective, I thought the fact that everybody was just kind of in their own headspace with some music that we were all listening to was effective. And obviously, I picked the firemost tunes. The question I picked was rolling backpacks. Are they a hazard? No. Should we ban rolling backpacks? And I think banning is a little bit extreme, but it was one of those things where I just kind of like, I would never have picked this thing, rolling backpacks, except for a student raised the issue last year, and then I realized how much this is like an issue that seems to unite all students is in their opposition towards rolling backpacks. And I think that's one of the disconnects. Like, adults often forget what it's like to be a kid, and we have this thing called confirmation bias that prevents us from realizing how much we forget. But rolling backpacks, like, honestly, I don't walk in the hallways when you guys are walking around in them. I don't remember them when I was a student. I thought it was interesting that everybody feels some type of way about rolling backpacks. So there's serious tripping hazards and make too much noise. People with rolling backpacks run over each other, run over people's feet with no remorse. Rolling backpacks are asked to get flipped. They're annoying. They get in the way of my feet and unfortunately get kicked. We're not in elementary school anymore. They are especially annoying in crowded hallways. Your responses were much less delicate in general than period 4. And you guys are the 2 course 2 classes. And it reminded me that there's always like I think I told you guys this a little bit, that, like, I can cite period 4, how sometimes they have better academic habits as a whole than you guys, but you guys are the class that doesn't sugarcoat things. You say how you really feel, and there is a part of you guys as a class that I respect. Like, I feel at home with that type of energy. The next question was learning about you as a learner. So I thought these were good answers. Keep in mind that I think what's interesting is that we're in a very unique time and place, not only to learn about ourselves as a learner, but to communicate it. And if we record it, like this is attempting to do, is to provide a model that other people might use that helps inform them do their own thing. And while it is better communication than we've had in the past, like, I'm still just picking whatever I did. I just picked 4 of these, and I don't know my own blind spots. Like, I wasn't looking for anything specifically, but so this isn't a comprehensive reflection of everybody's statements. It's just the things that I picked, but I liked these. I've learned that being able to ask other students is really helpful, and that's been hard online. I've learned that I have a tough time learning concepts in a home space when I'm surrounded by distractions. I also have a tough time learning concepts if I'm not actually interested in the topic itself. I'm also a very kinesthetic learner. I think this year's been tough on kinesthetic learners for sure. I've learned the study methods and routines that work best for me while studying for class or just staying organized in general. I work faster by myself and learn better when I enjoy the content. What schools can learn? Schools should learn to space out classes like distance learning because it encourages the retention of information instead of cramming 6 classes worth of information in 6 hours. I think that distance learning needs to teach admin and teachers to take advice from students. The workload can be overwhelming and the lack of motivation makes it really hard for some students. Taking these into account might help to level out things that favor specific types of learners. I think schools should learn from this year that while distance learning might help some people, it is not everyone's learning style that works best for them, and to think about the different ways everyone learns well in person or distance. Schools need to learn when we are at school, we should socialize with the people at school. Yes, we can hang out with our friends outside of school, but some people can't hang out that much. When we don't socialize, people get lonely and depressed, which leads to people becoming suicidal. And I think that's real, that we need to be aware of how much of the social impact that we've had here is. And I picked this because I think we need to really talk about mental health and depression and also suicide. Like I don't think we can run away from that word because we know it's a reality in this community. And we can't run away from the fear when we know that the concern is the fear of the word, when we know the concern for that action is real. I think that also the part that strikes me is that teachers need to take advice from students. This is one of the things where I think this kind of gets into a kind of like a scale and variance type thing. Like a lot of our systems and communities have evolved in a way where we've learned ways to dismiss the people that we're supposed to be serving or the people with the most acute needs. We found 1,000 different ways to marginalize and dismiss their voices. We're not even aware what those ways are. So we sort of need to learn before we can just start learn like for me to get to the point where I could learn from my students that the rolling backpack was a question that united everybody around something to talk about. I had to learn the ways that I was dismissing my students first. And so it's sort of like unraveling the cords when you pull a stereo away, and like you have to unravel them. Then you have to ask yourself, how did they get wound up that tightly in the first place? But I do think schools need to learn from this a lot of technical things, but also what has prevented us from adapting in the past and what can we do about that in the future. And, if we really want to learn, if we want to use our students as ways to help us reflect on our work, could we do that in better ways going forward? The actual learning and understanding of concepts, classes that would be easier in normal settings like science are harder because it's really challenging to understand any of the ideas through online learning. The hardest part of distance learning for me is just learning and fully understanding different concepts because I personally learn better in person than a classroom setting. The hardest part is finding motivation to do work and try my best. Definitely staying motivated and not getting to see teachers and classmates. This motivation thing is it's an important one. It's like, I'm sure I could just say, well, just be motivated. But motivation is a tough thing for everybody to find this year. And that includes teachers and that includes students. And if we're going back to that, like the discussion on what our privileges are that we often take for granted, like if it's hard for you to find motivation, and it is for all of you guys because you're missing that social interaction, like you just don't see the purpose. It's hard to connect what you're learning in class to some outcome that you might feel. Like kind of just imagine what it would feel like if you already felt like the system didn't care about you going in, or you already felt like the purpose of school was to give an illusion like it wanted you to succeed, but not actually to help you succeed. These are challenges that everybody's going through. I think it's important that you guys can speak up and voice those concerns. And I think it's also important to understand that you're not the only ones feeling that way. One piece of criticism I have for school is that they should not have access periods on Wednesdays because they are useless, and I just have to listen to my teacher rambling and wasting my time. I had to go and check because I was like, wait a second, are you in my access class? And luckily I was wrong, but I like my access class. In fact, that's oftentimes my best part of the week because I get to ramble. And one of the joys that I miss is wasting my students' time. All right, so criticism for this school, they need to actually ask the students how they feel. I think that over distance learning, there has been a lot more work in comparison to in-person sessions. I know that because we have less class time, teachers try to pack our homework with a lot of info, but it's very overwhelming sometimes. I also think that teachers really don't care if students are socially insecure or anxious. They will just call out anyone and force them to speak, which is a good skill to have, but I think it's often pushed too much on students via Socratic's debates and speeches. That's very insightful. I think how do you deal with insecure feelings and anxiety is a very good topic, and I think you have the potential to make it worse or make it better. A lot of times we fear doing anything. We do nothing because we're afraid of making something worse, and doing nothing is the worst thing. But a lot of times we're not aware of the impact of our actions, and then we make things worse that way. And I think it is hard as a teacher. I'll tell you, it is hard to find the right balance. Like, you really, in my opinion, you sort of have to earn the kids' trust before you make them feel uncomfortable. But you don't really want your students feeling comfortable in your class the entire year. You want to push them out of their comfort zone. This year, it's a lot different walking that fine line. I think students should be given less homework and given more interactive activities students may enjoy in school so that they can enjoy learning rather than just reading from a textbook. I think when it comes to feedback and the pacing towards progression of school, the school should prioritize student opinion over the parents if they don't already, especially in talks of whether we should go back in person or not, knowing that would also mean as students, we would have to adjust to a new schedule. Criticism for this class, I hesitate to say this, but I feel that the longer lecture videos could be helpful if Mr. Snyder did more example problems. I feel like I have not been learning much. I want to at least feel more confident with more detailed resource to reference. I appreciate that. I like how you hesitate to say this. I think when we talk about communication and why it's difficult, why these feedback loops have been corroded, we're not very good at giving or receiving critical feedback oftentimes. And I think this is an example of giving critical feedback in a way that validates the fact that we're in a difficult situation. And I also I've worked to get myself to the point where I just want to hear your criticism. Like I'm not going to personalize everything. And going forward, I welcome you to, if you tell me you don't like the tone of my voice or something like that, there's not much I can do about it. But if you give me feedback that I can respond to, I'm going to do my best to listen. One piece of criticism I have would be that sometimes groups don't talk in breakout rooms, and it's really awkward if you're not really friends with those people. Yeah, that's true. I don't have much to say about that. We should talk more. Yeah, that's true. I'm doing a lot of talking now. You're probably sick of it already. Honestly, this is one of my favorite classes for online learning because it's one of the only one that adapts to online learning smartly instead of being the same thing, but this time on the internet, which causes a lot of problems. I tried to filter out the ones that were, I didn't want to, a lot of people gave me positive feedback, I think, but there's like pressure to give positive feedback when your teacher asks you to. So I didn't want to focus on that, but I really did this like hearing that it adapts to online learning. And I went into this year thinking that if nothing else, I want to experiment. I want to practice. I want to feel like I make a bunch of mistakes and try to, when I get to whatever whoever I become as a teacher after this year, I want to know that I experimented as much as I could during this year. This is better than 4/6 of my classes, so I don't really have an issue. My issue with that was that 4/6 could be a simpler fraction. As far as mental health is the big thing. I feel like this whole forum is me thinking about mental health. Mental health is a tricky thing. It definitely is something that I think a lot of students don't always feel that excited to talk about, whether it's teachers or classmates. Would be nice if the school could generally acknowledge it exists. We're not happy all the time. Don't spend the entire school days drilling curriculum into our heads. The school only talks about change sometimes. They need to learn that actions are louder than words. I agree with all these. I think there's a bit of a thing with like reflection that's the same kind of way, like where my generation learns we weren't taught that well about reflection or meditation or a lot of different things like from our older generation. So now we don't know how to do those things that great, but we spend a lot of time talking about them. And I think mental health is something that we're only at the point where we realize it's a thing. So we talk a lot about it, but sometimes our actions are actually inconsistent with our intentions. We're not aware of the ways that we put pressure on kids. There's just a lot of things that raise. But I think what I found is good for my own mental health is letting go of things and also finding ways to feel empowered. And so in a lot of times like engaging further when I feel like I'm trying to disengage from something, lately I've found like, all right, I'm actually going to engage to the point where I'm going to like suffocate somebody with my like I'm going to like force people to hear my criticism. And there are a lot of opportunities I think for students to do that, and for people who want to change our status quo and to interrupt our power structures. I think going forward with all the different ways we can communicate now, there really are a lot of opportunities. And one thing that's good for mental health is feeling empowered. But I think not feeling empowered and hearing about it all the time is the part that makes it worse. So if you don't feel like things are addressing your mental health needs, or you feel like it's all words and no actions, it's all talk and talk is cheap, then that's the part where I think, yeah, I could tell you that it doesn't matter where you go to college, but if I'm assigning you 2 or 3 hours of homework a night, then my actions are not aligned with my intentions. And I think I'll say specifically that the mental health issue in this community is all very socially constructed thing. It's like a lot of it has to do with peer pressure, and it's a lot of this pressure on students to know exactly what they want to do with their future. And you realize you actually get angry about this when you go to college. I think because a lot of kids go from high schools like this to colleges and realize that very little of your education was about your personal identity or about your emotional skill set. It was all taught in a very objective way. And the college that you end up going to, it isn't as important. Like what determines whether your future is successful is you. It's not the college application that everybody's trying to get 5 different clubs onto. But it's hard to just say, don't worry about it. But truly, I think it's important to recognize that you guys have an enormous amount of support in this community, and remembering that pressure sometimes is coming from inside of you. If you could release it, you'd be better off. Shout outs. I want to give a shout out to my homies, Tasha, Avery, and Christian, for being an amazing group. Everyone that talks in class, I like having conversations with you guys, especially during access. That is what's up. I admit that I don't really know that many people in this class. I remember Sujat because he was my math class last year, and I'm in a breakout group with him, and he's pretty cool. Logan, Christian, Avery, my faves also, and Shika. She is so confident in who she is and wouldn't change anything and wouldn't change herself for anything. I love her authenticity. That's cool. All right. I hope you guys, well, who am I kidding? Nobody's still listening. But even though this was a thing that nobody listened to, it was helpful for me because I just need that time to talk as if people are listening. That's helpful for me. And I think I've gotten better at speaking and rambling for a long stretch of time without needing any feedback from my audience to tell me that they're still listening. All right.